It's 1979 at MIT, a campus alive with the hum of early computers and wild ideas about the future. In a basement lab, a small group of students are about to take on a challenge that sounds impossible: beating Las Vegas. At the center of it all is J.P. Masser, a grad student obsessed with numbers and probability. His curiosity starts with an elective called How to Gamble If You Must. The professor's warning was simple: in the long run, the house always wins. But there was one curious exception: blackjack. Masser couldn't let it go. Night after night, he coded blackjack simulations on MIT's mainframe, running thousands of Monte Carlo tests. The data came back clear. If you played enough hands, tracked the cards, and bet big only when the odds turned your way, you could flip the house edge. The math said it was possible. The only question left was, could it work in the real world? JP had the math for blackjack. Now he needed proof in real life. All the simulations, equations, and late-night debates in the dorms meant nothing until they were tested in the real world. So he gathered a few fellow math nerds, piled into a car, and headed for Atlantic City.
A totally new dimension in entertainment is only a bus ride away in the new Atlantic City.
The plan was simple: use their new blackjack strategy to flip the odds, walk away rich, and prove that the house didn't always have to win. The reality, though, this was a baptism by fire. The casinos were nothing like MIT's sterile computer labs. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, the lights were blinding, and the noise was relentless. Dealers moved fast, pit bosses hovered, and the tables were crowded with gamblers of every kind. Some drunk, some superstitious, all of them unpredictable. It didn't take long to realize that theory and practice were worlds apart. The team lost badly. The dream of easy riches vanished in a haze of neon and noise. Most of the original crew went back to their studies, but for JP, the loss only fueled him. The math was sound. The problem was execution. Beating the house would take more than clever calculations. It would take a team, a real team. Let's hit the pause button for a second, because before the story goes any further, before the disguises, the fake names, the paper bags full of cash, you need to understand the strategy they were attempting to use in Atlantic City. How do you beat blackjack? Well, first, you don't, at least not by luck. But you can shift the odds just slightly if you treat the game like a math problem instead of a gamble. First off, for any of you fortunate enough to not have played a casino game yet, the game of blackjack is simple. You're trying to get as close to 21 as possible without going over. Each card is worth its face value, face cards count as 10, and aces can be 1 or 11. You're not playing against other players, just the dealer, and the dealer always plays by strict, predictable rules. That predictability is what makes the game beatable. So now let's go back to JP and his team and the strategy they were trying in Atlantic City, which is card counting. Now, this strategy isn't about memorizing every card like you've seen in the movies. It's about keeping a simple mental score, a running tally of whether the deck is hot or cold. Here's the logic. High cards, like 10s, face cards, aces, are good for the player. Low cards, 2 through 6s, are good for the dealer. So players assign values: +1 for low cards, -1 for high cards, and 0 for the middle ones. As the cards are dealt out, you add or subtract in your head. When your count goes high, that means more big cards are left in the deck, which means you have the edge. That's when you bet big.
Changing 500!
When the count is low, you play it safe. It's not luck, it's not magic, it's math. And when done perfectly, it can turn a 0.5% house edge into a 1% player edge. It's small, but over hundreds of hands and thousands of dollars, it adds up. So with all that being understood, let's get back to JP and our story. Back in Cambridge, after that bruising Atlantic City defeat, JP knew one thing. If they were going to win, they needed a real team. Not a few friends playing cards, a team with structure, discipline, and nerves of steel. So he got to work recruiting. Flyers began popping up around campus, want to make money, learn to play blackjack. MIT's culture shaped everything that came next. The campus was a laboratory for big ideas, and for people who didn't just follow rules, but hacked them. The blackjack team became a magnet for these kinds of minds, students who saw the casino not as a place of luck, but as a game they could beat. Late at night, classrooms turned into secret training grounds. They'd run simulations on chalkboards and computers, argue over strategy, and swap stories of near misses and small victories. Word spread fast. Some recruits came through friends, lured by stories of Vegas comps, fancy suites, and front row show tickets. Others showed up because of the flyers, chasing a way to pay tuition or just to make some cash. For many, it was the ultimate MIT side hustle, a chance to use their brains to beat a system everyone else assumed was unbeatable. As JP worked to build his team, he knew that not everyone was worthy of participating in the high-stakes environment. So he implemented a set of tests. Anyone wanting to be a part of the team had to survive what was one of the most grueling and nerve-wracking training regimens in the world of gambling, or academia. It started with the basics. Recruits had to memorize Edward Thorp's Beat the Dealer strategy charts, internalize the high-low card counting system, and master the mental math required to keep a running count in their heads, all while carrying on a conversation, sipping a drink, or pretending to be just another clueless tourist. But the concept of card counting is not unknown to the casinos. The casinos have been aware of card counting far before JP and his team ever learned of it. As a result, casinos were always hunting solo counters. They watched for gamblers that go from timid to bold as the count changes. So JP and his team built a system around team play. Players were split into 3 roles. At one table, you'd have a spotter, someone quietly playing minimum bets, tracking the count, and blending in. When the deck turned favorable, they'd signal a scratch of the nose, a sip of their drink, a simple code word. That's when the big player walked in. They'd sit down out of nowhere and start betting huge. They didn't need to count at all. The controller, who would sit down to confirm the count, had already done the work for them. Then, after a few big hands, win or lose, the big player would disappear and the table would reset. To the casino, it looked completely random. To the team, it was precision. It was mathematics disguised as luck. Each role required not just mathematical skill, but the ability to communicate in code, blend in, and keep cool under pressure. This is the team's secret sauce, not just counting cards, but turning it into a synchronized, invisible operation. To simulate the chaos of a real casino, the team created a fake casino environment on campus. They'd blast music, fill the room with cigarette smoke, and have other players act as drunk and obnoxious patrons or pushy dealers. The dealer would go as fast as possible, trying to trip up the recruits. In this environment, the trainee had to keep count, make the right plays, and never lose focus. The final hurdle was the infamous checkout. It wasn't enough to pass once. You had to pass multiple times consecutively without making a single mistake. If you lost the count, made a basic strategy error, or missed a signal, you failed. If you got shortchanged on a payout and didn't catch it, you failed. The checkout was designed to weed out anyone who couldn't handle the psychological stress of the casino floor. It wasn't just about math. It was about nerves, discipline, and the ability to perform when everything around you was designed to distract and confuse. Some recruits would fail on the last hand, devastated after hours of perfect play. Others would freeze up, unable to handle the barrage of distractions. But those who passed emerged battle-tested and ready. Only then were they allowed to join the team. Only then did they become part of the most feared and best prepared card-counting crew the gambling world had ever seen. After months of late-night training sessions and endless practice runs in the MIT classrooms, the Blackjack team was ready for another shot at the casinos. But there was a problem: money. The students had brains, discipline, and a system, but their bankrolls were limited. To beat the house, they needed to play for real stakes, and that meant finding someone willing to put up serious cash.
Change only, 10,000.
That's when luck intervened. It comes back to those flyers, the ones JP had posted around campus advertising his blackjack course and the promise of beating the game. One day, a professional gambler named Dave saw the flyer and reached out. Dave wasn't just another hopeful student, he was a seasoned player with real money. Dave offered to bankroll a trip to Atlantic City, putting up $5,000. Suddenly, the team had the resources to play at higher stakes, test their system under real pressure, and if they were lucky, turn a profit. The team's first professional run wasn't perfect. They made mistakes, lost hands, and learned hard lessons about the volatility of blackjack. But they also doubled, then redoubled Dave's initial investment. The partnership proved that with enough capital, their system could work in the real world. The success of the professional run attracted more attention, more recruits, and eventually, more investors. And it was one of those investors who was about to change everything. Enter Bill Kaplan. Kaplan was not just another math whiz. He was a strategist, a Harvard grad with a gambler's heart and a business mind. Years earlier, he had stunned his family by postponing Harvard Business School to chase a dream in Las Vegas. Armed with just $1,000 and a book on card counting, he spent a year in the desert, turning that $1,000 into $35,000. He proved that blackjack could be beaten if treated like a science. Kaplan's reputation preceded him. The MIT students overheard him swapping Vegas stories. They saw in him what they lacked: experience, discipline, and a blueprint for success. So they made their pitch. Would Kaplan train and manage their team? Would he help turn their chaotic energy into something unstoppable? He said yes. Almost immediately, Kaplan began reshaping the team. Kaplan introduced spreadsheets, tracking every hand, every dollar, and every session. Kaplan taught the team the subtle psychology of the casino floor, how to blend in, play a convincing role, and stay cool under pressure. He taught them disguises, timing, and the choreography of signals. Then finally came the payoff. With Kaplan's oversight, the team returned to Vegas, not as curious students, but as professionals with a system and a bankroll. The results were astonishing. Within weeks, they were winning thousands of dollars per weekend. The math held up in the real world. Spotters and big players executed like clockwork, and the once chaotic team now ran like a well-oiled machine. For the first time, the MIT team could see the possibilities. What had begun as an experiment in probability had become a legitimate, profitable operation. Kaplan had done more than organize a team. He had turned students into professionals, chaos into strategy, and theory into cold, hard cash. Winning a few thousand here and there was exhilarating, but to win big consistently, the team needed a bankroll that could handle high-stakes play across multiple casinos, and that meant bringing in serious investors beyond just Kaplan. The recent opening of the Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut nearby was a game changer. And in 1992, Kaplan, JP Masser, and another teammate, John Chang, saw an opportunity. They formed a Massachusetts limited partnership called Strategic Investments. It sounded like a finance firm, but in reality, it was the blueprint for a business built entirely around blackjack. Through Strategic Investments, the team raised over $1 million from private backers who were willing to trust a bunch of MIT students and their discipline system. With capital and now structure in place, the MIT team expanded rapidly. Players were recruited from elite schools and trained to think like professionals. Every dollar was accounted for, every session was tracked, and every player measured against strict performance standards. For a brief moment in time, Strategic Investments became the most sophisticated blackjack operation the world had ever seen. They weren't just beating the house, they were running a business. And with the Vegas runs heating up, the MIT Blackjack team was on the cusp of legend. With strategic investments in place, it was time to see just how far they could push the system. The first taste of true large-scale success came in one of the busiest weekends of the year, the Super Bowl weekend in Las Vegas. The Strip was packed, buzzing with tourists, high rollers, and distracted pit bosses. The MIT players quickly fanned out, spotters quietly tracking favorable decks at dozens of tables, controllers managing signals, and big players swooping in to place massive bets when the count turned in their favor. The stakes were staggering. What had started as $300 bets were now $1,600, and on that Super Bowl weekend, some players were handling $10,000 a hand across multiple tables. The swings were extreme. A $100,000 loss one night could turn into a $600,000 gain the next. The math held up, and the team executed with near-perfect precision. For the team, the weekends were a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. The team would play for 48 hours straight, racking up wins and sometimes losses, collecting comps like free suites, steak dinners, show tickets, even the occasional private jet ride or casino-sponsored wedding. By Sunday night, they'd party, then catch the red-eye back to Boston, slipping back into the regularity of campus life. Back at MIT, almost no one knew what these students were up to. Their families, girlfriends, and professors were in the dark. On weekdays, they were just another group of overworked students. On the weekends, they were the most feared gamblers in Vegas. After weekends like the Super Bowl, the team wasn't just winning, they were living a life most could only dream of. But with every big win came a new danger. The casinos were watching. Dealers, pit bosses, and surveillance teams were trained to spot consistent winners, especially those who suddenly bet big when the deck turned favorable. A single suspicious player could be banned, or worse, force the team to abandon hundreds of thousands in winnings. To stay one step ahead, the students had to become invisible in plain sight. When it came to staying under the casino's radar, the MIT team went all out. Disguises weren't optional, they were a necessity, and the lengths they went to were spectacular. Things like wigs, fake mustaches, and eccentric outfits were standard practice. Some played bumbling tourists, pretending not to know the rules. Others went full method, high-rolling Russian arms dealers, complete with accents, backstories, and wives at the tables. John Chang once went in drag and still walked away with big winnings. They would even improvise on the fly. A spotter might roll up in a wheelchair to signal a big player, or a controller would pretend to fumble chips in a dramatic performance. The team coordinated code words, subtle gestures, and quick costume changes between tables. Every weekend, it was like watching a traveler theater group with $1 billion bankroll. And the creativity didn't just stop at outfits. They had to rotate hotels, shuffle schedules, and switch personas midweek just to stay invisible. By day, they were just MIT students walking between classes. By night, they were someone, anyone, who wouldn't draw suspicion while raking in chips. It was elaborate, it was ridiculous, and it was wildly entertaining. These were the nerds who could disappear into a crowd, reinvent themselves, and still count cards like pros. But for all their brilliance, the team was still vulnerable to the simplest of mistakes. The Vegas runs were high stakes, high reward, and high risk, but not just at the tables, in every detail of the operation. And as the team's legend grew, so did the pressure, the paranoia, and the odds that something, anything, could go wrong. For all of their mathematical genius and meticulous planning, the MIT Blackjack team was still made up of college students. And sometimes the biggest risks weren't at the blackjack table, but back on campus. After one especially lucrative Vegas run, the team returned to MIT flush with cash. One member, exhausted from the red-eye flight and the adrenaline crash, walked into the classroom for a team meeting. In his hand was a brown paper bag stuffed with $125,000 in cash. The class ended, and in the fog of sleep deprivation and routine, the bag was left behind. It wasn't until hours later, when the team member jolted awake in a panic, that the mistake was realized. He raced back to the classroom, heart pounding, but the bag was gone. What followed was 6 months that would test the team's nerves in ways no casino ever could. The missing money triggered a campus-wide search, and soon the authorities were involved as well. The Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI launched an investigation, suspecting the cash might be tied to something far more sinister than card counting. The team had to prove the money was legitimate, winnings from blackjack, not the proceeds of crime. Eventually, the trail led to a janitor who had found the bag and stashed it in his locker, unsure what to do with such a life-changing sum of money. After months of paperwork, interviews, and legal wrangling, the money was finally returned to the team. But the lesson was clear. In the world of high-stakes gambling, sometimes the greatest danger isn't the house edge or the pit boss. It's your own exhaustion and human error. For what was supposed to be a routine trip between casinos, the team wasn't flying commercial. Instead, they boarded a small, 2-seater plane piloted by Johnny Chang, one of the team's most experienced players who had just recently learned how to fly. The flight started out uneventful, but as they approached their destination, disaster struck. The plane came in too fast, clipped a wall, and crashed. Flames engulfed the plane. The team scrambled out, dazed and bruised, but still alive. But that's when the realization hit. Their cash, tens of thousands of dollars in team bankroll, was still inside the burning wreckage. For a split second, hesitation froze them. The risk of running into a burning plane is too much for most to willingly endure. But the thought of losing that money, not to a casino, but to a freak accident, was unthinkable. So in a move that would drive any firefighter insane, they ignored the heat and smoke and ran back, braving the flames to retrieve the cash. Cinched but victorious, they emerged clutching their precious winnings. The plane crash became one of the team's most legendary stories. It was a brush with disaster that could have ended the team's run, but instead, it became another wild chapter in their improbable journey. Proof that sometimes the biggest gamble isn't at the blackjack table. While the team was busy working on disguises, losing paper bags of life-changing money, and putting out fires, literally, the team's biggest danger was still working relentlessly against them. As I mentioned earlier, the casinos were watching. Dealers, pit bosses, and surveillance teams were trained to spot consistent winners. At first, the team's system seemed almost invisible, but the more they won, the more the casinos started to notice that something was off. Casinos were built on the illusion of luck. Hundreds of cameras lined the gambling pits, tracking every move. Pit bosses and staff watched high rollers like hawks, looking for any sign that someone was beating the system. When the casinos realized they were losing big, but couldn't figure out how, they called in the big guns, private investigators. Enter Andy Anderson, known to the team only as the silver-haired man. Anderson worked for Griffin Investigations, the most feared name in casino security. Griffin's job was to hunt down cheaters, card mechanics, and most recently, advantage players like the MIT team. Every casino on the Strip used Griffin's services, and Anderson was relentless. He'd go from casino to casino, learning the faces of big bettors, watching for patterns, and trying to piece together who was working with whom. Anderson's secret weapon was facial recognition, long before it was automated. He'd memorize faces, cross-reference them with addresses used to claim comps, and dig into any detail that seemed out of place. The MIT team made 2 major mistakes. They had written out detailed manuals on their strategy, and sometimes used real addresses for casino comps. Anderson eventually found one of these manuals, left behind by a careless team member. That, plus a string of Boston addresses, led him to the truth. The world's most successful card counting team was coming straight out of MIT. The next step was the infamous Griffin Book, a periodically updated binder of mugshots, names, and aliases of anyone suspected of having an unfair advantage over the house. When Anderson realized the scale of the MIT operation, he didn't just add a few faces. He got an MIT yearbook and scanned in every single student photo. At one point, the team joked that they had taken over the Griffin Book. They filled 140 pages with MIT faces, making it nearly impossible for any of them to play anonymously anywhere in Vegas. The MIT team fought back with ever more elaborate disguises. As we mentioned before, Johnny Chang played in drag, others donned wigs, fake mustaches, or even pretended to be in wheelchairs. But the casino adapted too. Upon landing at the airport, the team would sometimes find that a fax had already gone out to every casino in town, warning them that the MIT crew was in the area. And it wasn't just Vegas either. The team tried their luck in Europe, only to be detained in Monte Carlo, interrogated by police, and banned from the country. The psychological pressure was immense. Every trip felt riskier than the last. Every disguise was a gamble. Every win brought them closer to being caught. As the team's notoriety grew, so did the casino's countermeasures. Surveillance technology improved, automatic shufflers made card counting harder, the Griffin Book became gospel in the industry. The MIT team's once invisible system now was a target, and the casinos were determined to shut them down. But for a while, the cat and mouse game was thrilling. The team relished the challenge, the adrenaline, and the sense of being hunted but not yet caught. They were truly living double lives, until, inevitably, the house started to catch up. For all the MIT Blackjack team's legendary wins, the reality behind the glamour was far harsher. The grind was relentless. Players juggled MIT coursework with high-stakes travel, flying out Friday nights, gambling for 48 hours straight, and stumbling back into classes Monday morning. Sleep deprivation and the ever-present fear of being recognized wore them down. Every trip was a gamble, not just at the table, but against the casino, the Griffin Book, and the team's own exhaustion. Even the mathematically sound system couldn't shield them from Blackjack's brutal variance. Weekends that began with six-figure gains could end up in crushing losses. Not all players could withstand the pressure. Some brilliant recruits froze under the weight of responsibility, unable to fire their bets at the critical moment. Others suffered physically and emotionally from rapid swings in fortune, throwing up in the bathroom stalls after losing tens of thousands, spiraling from a single mistake, or being unable to recover composure under casino scrutiny. The losses could truly be catastrophic. One player lost $150,000 in minutes, unable to buy back in without revealing his identity. Another teammate and his wife were jailed in the Bahamas, losing not just personal winnings, but the team's bankroll they carried with them. Even moving the money they won became a source of stress, $300,000 strapped to their bodies, dodging airport security, and hoping for no mistakes. Internal tensions added to the pressure. Investors expected returns, players demanded larger cuts, and management had to maintain morale and accountability. Over time, the thrill began to fade. One teammate shared, "It was a waste of my time to continue. We didn't produce anything valuable. No one ever thanked us for our efforts, and the money was much less than starting internet companies." The team's skills and discipline remained sharp, but the human cost was undeniable. Some members left to pursue tech startups, finance careers, or other ventures where the payoff didn't come with the same physical and psychological toll. Others simply needed a life beyond 48-hour Vegas weekends, endless disguises, and the constant threat of being caught. Even at its peak, the MIT Blackjack team's greatest strength, discipline, teamwork, and relentless pursuit of the edge, was also its Achilles heel. As they say, the house always wins.
Because the house always wins. Play long enough, you never change the stakes, the house takes you. Unless, when that perfect hand comes along, you bet big, and then you take the house.
But for these brilliant students, the real lesson was that sometimes even the smartest players decide the game just isn't worth playing anymore. That is the story of the MIT Blackjack team, and how some nerds broke Vegas. You may have noticed that many of the clips in this video come from the 2008 film 21, a Hollywood take on the MIT Blackjack team's story. The film promised to tell the tale of the nerds who broke Vegas. However, the result was a story that often blurred the line between fact and fiction. In 21, the team is led by a charismatic professor, played by Kevin Spacey, who recruits and manipulates a group of brilliant students. However, the real MIT team, as we have covered, was run by students and alumni themselves. JP Master, Bill Kaplan, John Chang, and others managed the team as peers, not pawns. The film's hero, Ben Campbell, is a composite, a mix of several real players. Other characters were stitched together from fragments of real lives or invented entirely for dramatic effect. One of the real team captains explained, there was heavy use of composite characters, where entire lives were mixed together into a virtual person. Also, the meeting in the brothel was pure fiction. For instance, there was no woman in whom I had a romantic interest on the team at all. In fact, I was married and had a young kid, so that's pretty significant. The movie 21 dialed up the stakes with fistfights in backrooms, criminal undertones, betrayals, and wild casino showdowns. The risks of the real team, getting banned from casinos, losing their bankroll, or being asked to prove that they weren't cheating. Mostly mundane, but still nerve-wracking consequences. As Master recalled, by the 80s, not a lot of casinos were breaking people's legs. Sometimes, getting busted was even a little bit of a power trip. Hollywood also portrayed card counting a little bit differently. Hollywood liked to paint it as flashy and reckless, while the MIT team thrived on discipline, subtlety, and blending in. It almost never made sense for the big player to be flashy. You simply don't want to be remembered, period, wrote one former player. The movie also overlooked the team's diversity. The cast was far less representative than the real MIT students. Yet, despite the liberties, 21 had a massive cultural impact. Suddenly, card counting became a pop culture phenomenon. Casinos braced for a new wave of counters, and real team members fielded questions about their Hollywood doubles. The public image of the MIT team became one of glamorous risk-takers, overshadowing the reality of spreadsheets, practice, and teamwork. As J.P. Master greatly put it, when your story is distorted by fictionalization, a curious thing happens. You gain notoriety, but remain anonymous. The movie made the team famous, but also strangers to their own story. The legend of the MIT Blackjack team, once rooted in math and discipline, now sparkled with drama and myth. And somewhere between reality and Hollywood, the story continued to grow.